Mr. Hubbard, many millions of words have been said and written about Scientology, but I think there's still quite a lot of doubt in many people's minds as to exactly what it is. What is Scientology? How would you describe it?
Well, it's very interesting. You've just asked a question like, what are the contents of the Encyclopedia Britannica? Answer in one word.
Well, Mr. Hubbard, it's obviously something that's very wide-ranging. And if you can't describe it overall, perhaps we can begin at the beginning. How did you get into Scientology? How did it all start?
Well, that is fairly easy. When I was a very young man, I spent most of my teens in Asia. And that is an area of the world where human misery and want are very visible, where man has reached perhaps the lowest states of degradation. And a young man moving into that scene begins to ask the question, why? Why all this? Why? What is this? What depths can man fall to? And what is he anyway? And I began to ask this question, what is man? And I found, oddly enough, that nobody could tell me what man was. What did he consist of? Where was he going? What was he doing? I became very fascinated with this particular line of research, and I made it my life's work.
Did you read widely of philosophy?
Yes, but the philosopher, of course, has spent most of his working years in his ivory towers, and he was pretty insulated from life. To really know life, you've got to be part of life. You must get down and look. You must get into the nooks and crannies of existence. You have to rub elbows with all kinds and types of men before you can finally establish what he is.
And you, in fact, did this?
Yes, I've slept with bandits in Mongolia, and I've hunted with pygmies in the Philippines. As a matter of fact, I have studied 21 different primitive races, including the white race. And my conclusions were that man, regardless of his state of culture and so forth, was essentially the same, that he was composed of, he was a spiritual being. And he was a spiritual being that was pulled down to the material, the fleshly interests, to an interplay in life that was, in fact, too great for him to confront. And I concluded finally that he needed a hand.
Now, what was the first step in the formulation of Scientology? What was the first piece of knowledge that you uncovered?
Well, that is an interesting question, because when I first entered a university, I took science and mathematics. I was forced to take this rather than philosophy, which was my natural bent. And I learned the rules of logic and the scientific approach. These things, by the way, are not generally known to philosophers. And my first effort was to find a common denominator to all men. And I had seen him in his more primitive states, and I'd seen him in his highly cultured states. And I said, somewhere one can isolate a common denominator that embraces all men. And perhaps from that we can unlock this riddle.
You mentioned just now that you discovered for yourself that man was a spirit. Are you here comparing Scientology with a religion, any religion in fact, that also sees man as a spirit?
Well, man has conceived man to be a spirit for many more years than he has conceived man to be an animal or a materialistic thing. We have a 2,000-year history of man as a spirit, whereas we only have less than a century of considering simply mud. And therefore, my study is more traditional than most philosophies. Now, when you get most modern renditions and so forth. But man poses a great many problems, and he is so varied from culture to culture, from type to type, race to race, that when I discovered the common denominator of existence and so forth, I was away, and I could go forward from that point, and I did discover that.
Can you now take us forward from this point and tell us where you went when you made that first discovery of yours?
Well, I discovered that the common denominator of existence was survive. Whatever else man was trying to do, whether he was cultured or primitive and so on, he was attempting to survive. And then one had to move forward from this point to find out what methods he used to survive, how he adapted himself to environments in his attempted survivals and so on. And one found out that man advanced to the degree that he preserved his spiritual integrity, that he preserved his values, that he remained honest, that he remained decent, and he disintegrated or deteriorated to the degree that he abandoned these things and adopted more evil courses and so on.
Now, how can Scientology help man, universal man, to overcome the problems he faces?
Very simple. You see, we live in a world where we have governments and we have societies and so forth who are desperately trying to help man. They are trying, however, to solve his problems for him. And their efforts to solve his problems for him and so forth have not really resulted in any great advance for man. Now, the real work here is to put man in a mental condition where he can solve his own problems. And the aim and goal of Scientology is to take an individual or a group, and by taking the individuals in the group, put them in a position where they can confront their own problems and solve their own problems, and so bring themselves up by their own bootstraps. No amount of, well, let me put it this way. Have you ever had a friend that you tried to give advice to, who then took it and went along fine? Or have you had friends that when you gave advice to them and so on, why, they rather resented it and didn't take it? Have you ever had such a condition?
Yes.
Well, very good. Let's put this on a much broader basis. If we take a man and we keep giving him advice and giving him help and pushing him along and so on, we don't necessarily wind up with a resolution of his problems. But if, on the other hand, we put him in a position where he had higher intelligence, where his reaction time was better, where he could confront life better, where he could identify the factors in his life more easily, then he's in a position where he can solve his own problems. So he looks around, he starts solving his own problems, and so he betters his own life. That is the difference between Scientology and other efforts to help man.
Mr. Hubbard, admittedly, this would seem to be both mental and a physical approach to living in this world, to helping people to live in this world. But where does the spiritual side come into Scientology?
Well, it's very interesting. The more you try to help man physically, apparently the less progress you make. It was only when we began to treat man, and when I began to treat man as a spiritual being who was not really dependent upon the body or the flesh, that I made any progress at all. Man is a spiritual being. He is not a piece of flesh. And when you begin to handle man on the basis that he is a spirit, that he has unlimited ability, that he is not necessarily pinned down into, like everybody has just so much IQ, and they never can have any further IQ. When we start that approach, you see, we lose. But when we say he is a spirit of infinite capability, and then we try to improve that capability, in that way we win, and we win very, very, very profitably, very easily.
Through Scientology, is it possible to reach towards God?
Oh, very definitely. A Scientologist, before he has gone very far, begins to realize the nature of the universe. He realizes that this didn't all just occur spontaneously one fine day out of some scientific formula. And he realized there must have been an author to all of these things. And he also realizes, oddly enough, in his own participation.
All religions would seem to have a dogma, a discipline. Now, how disciplined is Scientology?
The discipline is entirely the limitation of the conduct of the auditor. That is to say, an auditor is a practitioner in Scientology. He listens and he computes. So therefore we call him an auditor. And he is not permitted to evaluate for the person he's working with. He's not permitted to do certain things. He is governed by a code of ethics like the medical field is governed by the Hippocratic Oath. Only we, of course, do not treat the body. We are not interested in illness and so forth. Well, you have to neglect illness and the body and so forth to improve man. And this is quite remarkable. But the whole point here is that the more you handle man as a spiritual being, the more you recognize his spirituality, the more you recognize that he is basically good and that his evil is simply additive to him, why, the more progress you make with the individual man.
This sounds, Mr. Hubbard, in a sense, like an extension of psychology or psychiatry. Can you comment on that?
Oh, no. Psychology is 1879, Wundt decided that men were all animals. As Professor Wundt, Leipzig, Germany, and rather typically a Germanic concept that man is just an animal. He's a sort of a machine, and you adjust the nuts and bolts, and he runs well. Psychiatry has to do with the insane, and we have nothing to do with the insane whatsoever. The insane, well, they're insane. So this is a final disintegration and deterioration of the spirit. That's all the psychiatrists. But psychology, no, I'm afraid we don't have anything to do with psychology. After all, psychology long since stated that their own term, psycheology, meant nothing. And they say in their textbooks they don't know what a psyche is. And of course, psyche is Greek for spirit. So theoretically, they have preempted the name, the study of the spirit. But they do not study the spirit. They regard man as an animal. We are the only ones who study the spirit, so we have to use the word Scientology. And Scientology means knowledge or truth, study of, the study of knowledge or truth. Or if you use it as a Greek sentence, it's I know the word, is what it works out to be, according to Oxford. I asked them one day up at Oxford, what does Scientology mean? And they said it means really the study of knowledge, or I know the word.
This sounds rather like the command, man, know thyself. Is this part of the Scientology reasoning?
I should think that would have to be part of any philosophic concept of man. You see, if you don't know yourself, you know nothing. And it's all right to guess at what you are, but to know what you are, that is the essence of the whole problem. And it takes a very brave man to really confront what he himself is.
Going back now to this person you mentioned, the auditor, the practitioner in Scientology, just how much training does this person get?
He goes through very intensive training, usually in a city somewhere in the world. He attends an academy, and he is trained there upwards to, well, it actually isn't fair to say the total time of training because he's trained very intensively and so on. He's trained there sometimes a year, sometimes more, and then his training is normally finished off by coming to a higher level organization and so forth, and he is trained there for more than a year. But the overall training of an auditor compares to the same number of class hours in college of about 12 years. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to study in this particular field. You're handling the raw stuff of life. And his case, his beingness, of course, must advance proportionately to his study. And he has to become better and better. In other words, his IQ has to go up, up, up. The higher the level that he is qualified to audit at, why, the more improved his own case has to be.
You've mentioned two things here, beingness and IQ, which is intelligence factor. Are these two the same?
Oh, no. The beingness, we might put it under the heading, would be the ability of an individual to live or to handle the environment around him. In other words, to be something and to handle things around him. And intelligence is a more or less arbitrary factor. A grade of 70 is something, I think, a moron, and 100 is 105, something like that. That's pretty bright. 138, well, that's genius, and we go up from there.
Could I just stop you here? Did I understand you to say that a person's IQ can be raised through Scientology?
Oh, yes, yes. This is the one thing that Scientology has upset the world's universities with. They used to say that IQ never changed. Nobody could ever change. Nobody could be any different than anybody ever was. And this was quite interesting because when we finally demonstrated this with their own IQ tests, why, they became very, very upset and began to test much more widely. And they tested people before Scientology processing and after Scientology processing, and uniformly found that their IQ had raised.
Who's they?
The professors, the fields, the schools of philosophy, schools of psychology, and so on.
But surely you've only got as much brain as you're born with.
Oh, no, and brain has nothing to do with it. Brain is a sort of a, well, I don't know, brain is brain. What it does, I'm never quite sure. But, and I don't think anybody else is. But the person, as a spiritual being, is capable of using his brain, or so on. The brain is a sort of a switchboard. And if you said that a telephone switchboard, then, was the intelligence of the corporation it served, this is about the same statement that the brain establishes the IQ of the human being. It's not, just not true. A being is a being. He is a spirit, and he actually can exist independent of his body. This is one of the more interesting discoveries in Scientology.
Now, an auditor in Scientology must have beingness and a good IQ. What other talents does he require to be a good auditor?
Well, a person has to have very, very good moral fiber. You might say he has to, you can't, and we will not take anybody who has even faintly bad background and so forth as an auditor. He has to be pretty well educated, his general education certificate, something like that. He has to have a desire to help people, and this is not everyone.
You said just now a bad background. In Scientology, what is good and bad? Does it conform to the normal moral standards of society?
Oh, yes, very much so. Very much so. Same.
Mr. Hubbard, I'd like now to take somebody who would like to get into Scientology. How do they go about this?
Well, normally they read books, and they read quite a few books, and they are around and about it for, well, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Well, they're really in Scientology. They will belong to a group and so on. They will get auditing. Their IQ goes up. Their abilities increase. They're more capable in handling their lives. And then somebody decides that he wants to be an auditor. All right, he can go to a school and study this and find out how to be one and so help others.
Now, you mentioned books. You yourself have written a lot of books.
Oh, yes.
Could you give me some titles here?
Well, the earliest book on the subject, of course, is not Scientology, but Dianetics Through Mind. And this book, that's the background of all of this. That's what started all the trouble. Psychiatric textbook publisher knew that I had been studying in the field of man, and knew I had been studying ethnology and anthropology, two very tough words which merely mean study of what man does and has done. And he asked me if I wouldn't please write a textbook that gave the various things which I had found and discovered. And we expected this to sell about 6,000 copies, and I was, in actual fact, going to go to Greece to head an expedition. And I was all set to go and so on, and this textbook was published. And it hit the top of the bestseller list of the New York Times, and it just stayed there month in, month out. And that was 15 years ago, and this book still sells as a bestseller every year.
What was this called?
Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health.
Now, why did the name change?
Because Dianetics is through mind, do you see, and is in essence actually a mental study. Scientology had to be broadened because it was more firmly established that man was a spirit after that, and you couldn't go along with the same word.
Now, when was this book published?
1950, May the 9th, 1950.
And is that as old as Scientology or Scientology Dianetics is?
Yes, yes. Well, actually, no. Researches on this really started in university in 1930-31, and moved on forward. The first major discovery that life, all forms of life, behaved according to the principle of survival and so forth was made in 1938. And after the war, after some years of study, I was able to move it up into a publishable form. But I was actually known for many years for working in this particular field, but I never wrote anything about it, never published anything, never told anybody about it to amount to anything. And when I did, it was like I started an avalanche.
Now, if someone wants to get into Scientology, they read your books, as you said, but where do they go from there?
They would find the nearest organization, and they would go there, and they would get training, or as we call it, processing, and so on.
Can you describe processing?
Processing is the principle of making an individual look at his own existence and to improve his ability to confront what he is and where he is.
To make him look at his own existence.
That's right.
And confront where he is and what he is.
That's right.
How is this brought about?
You just ask the person to look, actually. Of course, you're asking a very, very technical question. An auditor has to be able to get his questions answered, and the individual who's being processed finally has to answer the question. The question is asked until it is totally answered and the person is totally aware that he has answered it.
Is this a form of psychoanalysis?
No, psychoanalysis, they lay back. Don't associate Scientology with such people. That's terrible. That's bad manners, you know. I mean, that business about sex and all that sort of thing. These people, you know, in psychoanalysis, they worked on somebody for a year just to find out if they could help him, and then they charged him about 9,000 quid for having not helped him and so forth. But that's psychotherapy. That's for the neurotic or the person who is insane or something like that. It has nothing to do with Scientology. Scientology is for an able guy like you or like me, able to function in life, able to make his own way, does his work and so forth. All right, that's the man that should be helped. That's the man you should help out, because that fellow is having a hard time. And he's got his problems. Now, if you put him in a position where his intelligence is up to handling his problems, where his ability to confront life is increased, you'll find out that he is better. He can better his environment. He can take care of his family better. He can do his job better. He can live better, and so forth. And that's all we want in Scientology. The insane and so forth, somebody else can have them. They've already failed.
But you did say that people coming into Scientology should have this desire to help.
Oh, yes.
Cannot Scientology go out of its way to help these people who are perhaps not completely sane?
Oh, yes, you can do. Scientology could do things like that. When you know the basics of human existence and so forth, you could apply them in almost any sphere. For instance, a great many people think that Scientology does medical treatment and so forth, simply because people who are processed and so on tend to get well and recover from certain illnesses. That's a secondary action. A person who is able, of course, is more able physically also. And however, when a person turns up who is ill and so forth, we just send him to the doctor. We're not interested in treating human illness.
You said it could help certain illnesses there. What kind of illnesses?
Oh, it is not. It is not, in actual fact, medical treatment. So to say what illnesses it helps and so forth would be, well, if a person has psychosomatic illnesses and that sort of thing, and they tend to fall away as he increases his ability. But this is no treatment of those illnesses.
Now, if this is correct, why don't the medical profession use Scientology?
They do. They do in many parts of the world. As a matter of fact, a doctor in Michigan the other day told somebody that Dianetics was totally owned by the medical profession now and didn't belong to Hubbard anymore.
Scientology has attracted a lot of publicity in the press, and the press has said that it tends to be something of a racket to make money for those people who are running it.
No, that of course, most press is motivated by vested interests, as anyone knows, and they merely say what they're told to say. And when you realize that the medical psychiatric world have an investment which brings a return of 2 to 3 billion pounds per annum over the world, they try to protect that. And that is the source of criticism of Scientology. These statements about this, that, and the other thing, any new movement gets these things, and in Scientology those are not based on any fact at all. As a matter of fact, I don't make any money out of Scientology, and it cost me I don't know how much of my own personal fortune to do the research, and I've not been recompensed for it ever. And
you mentioned then that man is a spirit. Can you define this spirit in terms of Scientology?
Oh, yes. Man has been interested for a very long time in what was a spirit and so on. And he was very, very mystified as to what a spirit was. And he talked about ghosts and places being haunted and so on. This is a whole line of approach. He talked about the human soul, and it went to heaven and it went to hell and so forth. And he was very much adrift about this thing. He was both afraid of it and otherwise. And it was rather amusing to find out that he is it. He is a spirit, and the early Greek, for instance, worked along this line. They wanted to know what man was. They concluded that he was a spirit clothed in flesh, and that happens to work out, and so forth. The reason Scientology's assumptions can be considered to be true is because they work. And Scientology is totally a workable science. It is only workable. We're not interested in ultimate or absolutes. We're interested in what produces results. And if you know certain things and you apply them, and that then increases a man's IQ, increases his ability to handle the world around him, why, he naturally then is able to do better and to do more, to make more money, to be happier in his environment and so forth. And if you approach it as though he were a spirit, then you succeed. If you approach it as though he were just a mechanical monster of some kind or another, 10 stones of flesh or something like that, why, you don't increase his IQ and so on. So we, of course, prefer, maybe we are novel in this, but we prefer the tactics which work, not the tactics which are merely stylized or which we're supposed to have.
But in your processing, you work on the mind, don't you?
Well, yes. Let me give you an example here of something of the sort. Let us say here is not a very good example. Here's something. Here's something. Now we speak of a body. Here we speak of a body, and there is a body, and now there's an invisible thing, somewhat invisible, but nevertheless containing mass and space and energy, electrical potential and so forth, which surrounds this, which you call the mind. And in that mind is recorded every experience the person has ever had. They are recorded continuously and so on. And then within all that, centralized in all that, you have the spirit. and it does not have mass, and it does not have a body, and so on. All it has is a beingness and a sense of identity, the ability to create, the ability to be, and that is the spirit. That is you. You ask somebody, what is a spirit? And the fellow, you might as well ask, how are you? You get the same response. So, but anyway, there is this mind, and then there's a body. So actually, a spirit is wearing a mind, and it's wearing a body. And when you audit or process a person, he then is able to confront this mind, which hitherto has been totally invisible to him.
And we're talking here about the unconscious mind.
Well, yes, there's the conscious mind, the unconscious mind. Any kind of mind is simply a composite of mass, which contains experience and pictures of experience and so forth. Traumatic experience, pleasant experience, and so forth. This is a record of his experience. And that is his mind. Man has an automobile accident. He has a picture of an automobile accident. He has all the sensations of having been hurt in the automobile accident. It takes him a long time to recover because he's still wearing the automobile accident. If you said, hey, why don't you take this automobile accident and throw it away? Why, all of a sudden he recovers from the automobile accident, naturally, because the thing that's keeping it impressed upon him and his body is his mind. And so you do work with the mind.
From what I can gather, you do see the spirit as being the most important factor in the overall life of man. But is this the same sort of spirit as a very religious person might see?
Pretty much so. Pretty much so.
Are Scientologists religious people?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the Hubbard Association of Scientologists International is a religious fellowship, and in America particularly, Scientology is used widely in religion. I remember Archbishop Odo Berry here uses Scientology in most of his sermons, he used to, and so on. When you have discovered that man was a spirit, you of course have invaded the field of religion, and you are religious. But remember this, that religion has come uniformly from philosophy. Philosophy is senior to religion.
Do I understand from what you say that you can be not only a Scientologist, but a Roman Catholic and an Anglican as well?
Oh, yes. As a matter of sober fact, we have many, many denominations in Scientology, and it's one of the principles of Scientology that one can be a Scientologist regardless of his race, color, or creed, anywhere in the world.
Then Scientology itself is not exactly a religion.
Scientology could be called, well, you could call it a religion of religions. You will find in actual fact, when you go around and look at the various religious philosophies and so forth, that man has in religion many answers to his future survival. And he has many explanations of existence. Now, when you clarify those, various religions feel that they are expanded or that they are clarified as well. And they are quite keen to find out how this illustrates or illuminates their own religion.
Are you saying then that any specific religion is rather narrow in its outlook?
No, no, no. Any man is entitled to believe what he wishes to believe. I have no quarrel with man's beliefs and so on. But religion has had so many facets that its main point of dispute in life is the fact that so many people in so many different places have so many different views of what life and God are all about. And if Scientology could reconcile these views, it would be doing a great service to man.
Do you think it can, Mr. Hubbard?
I not only think it can, I know that it does. We have, in many instances, been able to bring a great deal of knowledge or relief or light into various situations of a religious nature without, for a moment, disputing the tenets which were held. After all, religion is basically an effort to make man good, an effort to give him a better society and so forth, and Scientology does all those things, so naturally it aids and abets the effort of any religionist or any minister anywhere to achieve his own purposes.
But doesn't Scientology have any dogma at all? For instance, life after death?
Well, life after death is life after death, and you can't lay down a dogma where you're dealing with fact. And it's very interesting that an individual does survive life after death, but I'm afraid that's too technical a question to go into in a program of this nature.
Are you saying that Scientology has proved this?
Yes, proven it definitely.
Has it proved anything else in the spiritual field?
Well, yes, it's proved that man is basically capable of spiritual betterment, and this question has been in point for some time and is one of the attack points of psychology. They say that man is the same, he never changes. Of course, the church exists to to spiritually better man, and man can be bettered spiritually.
Do you think that man is basically good?
Man is basically good, yes. His experiences have led him into evil, and he very often solves his problems from his own point of view only. And when he solves a problem from his own point of view, of course, he gets other points of view into trouble. What is good for a duck hunter is not good for the duck.
Do I understand from this, then, that through Scientology processing, you can show man where he's going wrong and help him in this way? In other words, he helps himself.
He helps himself. We do not say, you must do this, you must do that, and so forth. We show him only how to confront his existence, how to handle his immediate problems. And as he progresses up the line toward greater spiritual freedom, he learns that there are wrong ways to go about things and right ways to go about things. And he gradually drops away the shortcuts to fortune, the shortcuts to fulfillment of his desires, and so on, that we normally associate with evil practices. And he becomes an honest man.
You said that through Scientology processing, a person was able to look at the problems, to confront the problems that they were facing in their everyday life. Is this some form of hypnotism?
Oh, no. That's very funny. Man is asleep. He is hypnotized. He is made to fixate on certain things, you see, and the process that you normally know as brainwashing and that sort of thing is hypnotizing man. It's forcing him into certain values. It's crowding him by various duress into these values. And he eventually becomes a person who has no awareness. Now, in Scientology, reverse the process, and you make him wake up. And he gradually gets more and more alert, and he's more and more wide awake, and his IQ rises higher and higher, and he is more and more capable of knowing what's going on about him. It's quite the reverse. Any ideology that wants to hypnotize man into believing, well, take communism, for instance, want to hypnotize man into believing he's this or that or the other thing and so forth. It comes a terrible cropper with Scientology, because such a man becomes unbrainwashed, you might say. He becomes unhypnotized. And that was the first thing, one of the first things I discovered about processing. It was actually the basic discovery of processing, that man was asleep, and he had to wake up. And then I went about trying to find out ways and means of how to make him do this, and that became processing.
Do you use drugs in any way?
No, never. Once in a while, Scientologists will take vitamins or something like that to, well, just like anybody else does, but otherwise no drugs.
Is there any equipment used in this processing?
Yes, we have a meter, one of the most misunderstood objects that anybody had anything to do with. And a meter simply shows where an individual is aberrated. And the lie detector, of course, is not a lie detector. It doesn't detect lies. It only detects disagreements. And you ask the fellow, did you murder the girl? And he disagrees with murdering the girl. And of course he gets the reaction on the lie detector, and they take him out to the electric chair and electrocute him. Lie detectors are no good. But it does show that he is upset about the idea of murdering a girl. Do you follow? Now,
yes.
If you ask him why he was upset about this particular idea, you might find some relative who had been murdered that he had completely forgotten about. And he illuminates this sector of his life, and it clears.
How would you describe the mental state of a patient during processing?
Well, I've never processed a patient, so I wouldn't know, you see, because patients are people who are sick, and in mental institutions and that sort of thing, and although I've worked with such people just in the normal experience of existence, this has nothing to do with Scientology. But how is he? He's wide awake, bright alert, quite interested, and he is examining things which he had never examined before, and he becomes quite happy about it.
Doesn't he get introverted looking into his unconscious mind?
Yes, but he introverts in order to extrovert. In other words, he is actually handling the things which cause him to be introverted. And when he has handled those things, he extroverts.
You've mentioned a lot about freedom of the mind, Mr. Hubbard, but often this can be mistaken for a form of anarchy, where the person is under no discipline whatsoever.
Well, you find out that man has to be put under discipline to the degree that he is aberrated. And man being basically good, the more you make him free, why, the better his behavior is, and we have I don't know how many case histories that prove this.
You mentioned aberrated. What does that mean?
Aberrated. Aberrated is a crooked line. That's the definition of the word. It comes from light traveling in a crooked line. And man's thinking is very often in a crooked line. So he gets from point A to B through so many different points that he never does arrive at B. And that is called aberration. And when you straighten that out, and he can think straight, you might say, he is no longer aberrated.
Does it tend to make his personality rather negative in any way?
No, no. Whatever he is, there's more of him. It's quite interesting to watch some girl, for instance, who's been a mousy little thing and seems very retiring and so forth. You process her, she becomes quite alert, quite proud, quite expansive.
People do change then. Does this happen very quickly?
Very, very quickly.
After, say, a certain number of hours of processing?
Yes, yes. There's no telling how long it will take. Sometimes it's 20 minutes for a certain level.
And can you register their progress?
Oh, yes. Well, of course, there are tremendous batteries of tests which register this. There's such a thing as reaction time. A man's reaction time changes, his IQ changes, all kinds of things change. There's tremendous numbers of things which alter in a person. And the odd part of it is they alter for the better. And that's where the hope is for man. There is hope for man. He is not just an evil beast who will get worse and worse and worse and worse. With Scientology, he can get better, and he can get kinder and more decent and more tolerant of his fellow man, and perhaps some of the basic goals of religions of the past can be attained with Scientology.
Mr. Hubbard, do you find any opposition coming towards Scientology from the organized religions?
Not really anything that I would call opposition. Naturally, these people feel that we are challenging their particular sphere of action or something like that, and well, they read about Scientology and they understand what we're trying to do, and the opposition really fades away.
Are you in fact challenging their sphere of authority?
No.
In no way at all?
No. A man is free to believe what he believes.
Mr. Hubbard, what you said is all very well in theory, but what is the practical application of Scientology for the average man in the street?
Well, the average man is up against certain problems. He's asking himself certain questions. How can I make more money? How can I make my wife faithful to me? How can I make my children grow up? How can, well, in other words, how can I live a better life? How can I make things more even, more stable for my family? How can, you know, how. And what am I up against? What is happening to me in my life? What is my purpose in life? And so forth. These questions, in actual fact, absorb a tremendous quantity of his energy. And he himself is not able to go out and do anything very progressive about it. So the best thing for him to do is to go out and do something about it. But he can't do anything about it because he is so immersed in this. So actually, in Scientology processing, he resolves these questions. He understands what he's doing. He knows what he wants to do. And he makes up his mind and he goes ahead and does it. And he turns from a man who is simply a puzzled, static being into somebody who is more dynamic, who is able to accomplish something.
You seem to me to have a pretty low idea of the normal human's life.
Well, when you see as much human degradation as is visible within any 10-block walk from any area, it's a very callous person that doesn't want to do something about it and so forth, because all these are basically decent people that somehow or another went wrong. I don't have a low idea of these chaps at all. I think that man is what he is, and he can be better, and that is all, I think. But actually, every great movement in the world today has as its common denominator an effort to improve man and his lot. So if that is the case, then everyone must have a pretty low idea of what man is all about.
What is the main advantage of Scientology over all the other creeds and all the other religions and ideas that have been formulated since man began? Why is it that you go for Scientology? Why do you support this particular thing?
Because it works. And that is really the only reason. It works. This doesn't say that other things don't work, but they tend to be impositive. But I never would criticize any other religion.
I'd like to end on a more general subject and look at Scientology as it is today. Do you see it as a growing force?
Yes, the actual statistic of its growth is 2.5 times per annum. And this is fairly rapid because it is already very large.
Now, is it changing its ideas in any way as it gets bigger?
No. Same ideas. Help the able, make the able more able. To this degree, it is changing its ideas. It's starting to take responsibility for the group, for society. Much more responsibility for society in addition to responsibility for the individual. There are certain evils in society which definitely should cease, and we are taking some responsibility for them.
Now, as you process the individual, you find that he gets better and better and more able. But is there any end to this?
Yes, it's a finite state known as clear, and that means that the individual has erased what the Freudian said was his basic illness, which is his reactive mind. His unconscious mind is gone, and he is totally alert and totally capable. And this state has been achieved, and our program actually in this has just culminated this last few months. Research is finished at this particular time because we are making such individuals, and we're making them regularly and we're making them routinely.
But it doesn't make any difference to the fact that he grows older and things of this nature?
No, doesn't make a bit of difference.
Mr. Hubbard, I'd like to ask you a direct question now towards the end of this program. Why do you think man is here on this planet? What's his purpose? Why is he in a body?
Well, he was put here, and he was supposed to make his own way out of it.
Who put him here?
Well, call it a supreme being or higher forces. And he actually, and I hold this in common with many, many sages, he was put here to work out his own salvation. And we feel in Scientology that we've made a very big stride in that direction.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, oh, dancing for my love, then then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here. Bye.